I would just like to set it straight that what I'm going to give you is not like when you do it overnight, you're gonna be a success right away. Because in the end, it really has to do with your foundation, with your proficiency level. So let's start first with listening, okay? I highly suggest that you focus more on active listening, not just passive listening. When you say passive listening, you're hearing things. Like, for example, right now, you could hear some background noises. There's a child over there playing. There are cars honking. So that's actually just passive listening. You're aware that someone is talking, someone is saying some words, but you're not really understanding what they're talking about. So that's passive listening. Whereas in active listening, you really are understanding word per word, what they're talking about. So, for example, this is how the IELTS test is designed. In the first section, it's usually an inquiry. So it's very common that there will be a person asking for details, let's say for a tour. Okay, it could also be an inquiry in renting an apartment or a flat. So it will be a dialogue between two people. And then in section 2, it will be a monologue. So usually it will be about orientation, let's say in a university library, or it's also a tour guide. Okay, but the similarity between sections 1 and 2 is that they're using general English. So when we talk about general English, it's a day-to-day English. Okay, so of course that's somehow easy, right? But when it comes to the section 3 and 4, they are already using academic English. So maybe for others who are quite new to the IELTS test, when you talk about academic English, it's the kind of English that you encounter in the universities and also in the professional world, especially in news. Okay, that's what it means with academic English. So in section 3, they're also going back to dialogues. So it could be between a tutor and a student. It could be between two students talking about a specific project. And then in section 4, they go back again to a monologue. So this time, it will be a lecture by a professor. So it could be with any topic, okay? It could be, talking about climate change or paleontology. Basically, it just, again, assesses if you can follow through and digest also that level of English. All right, so my tip here is that knowing sections 1 and 2 are the easiest, make sure that you can perfect them so that if ever that you have mistakes in section 3 and 4, at least you can have you have an allowance. You have room for mistakes there. And what I also know is that if you're aiming for a band 7 in listening, just ensure that you get low 30s, like let's say 30 to 33. That would be a good sign already that you'll most likely end with at least a 7 in the listening test. But maybe you're gonna ask me like, is it possible to get a 9? Super. It's actually listening and reading where it's possible to get a band 9. But in speaking and writing, please be realistic. It's not that easy. Actually, it's it's nearly impossible for any common person to get a band 9 unless they have wide and extensive immersion in academic English. Okay, so most of the time, for people who have, it's their first language, or if it's an acquired language, they usually are professors, or these are the people who have really dealt with a lot of academic topics. That's really their world. Most of them are from the academia. So it's not surprising that they could get a band score of 9 in speaking and writing. So let's just be realistic. You can desire to get a band 9 in listening and reading, but when it comes to speaking and writing, just focus on what is needed, which is 7. Okay, it's just management of expectations.
So let's talk about reading in IELTS category.
Okay.
Category.
Yeah.
So what can you share or give us some tips on how to pass the reading subtest?
Okay, this is what I would like to say. Really, like, it's an appeal to the Filipino people. unfortunately, we are not a reading nation, so it's quite burdensome for us to have daily reading. But I tell you again, you can take a crash course on orienting yourself on how the IELTS test looks like, what's the approach to the test, and so on. But when it comes to the skill, there's no instant success stories, okay? It really takes time, effort, and really dedication. So what I mean with that is that please do daily readings. Similar with what I mentioned previously in the listening, that you have passive and active listening. Here in the reading, we also have that. We have passive reading, we also have active reading. So when we talk about passive reading, okay, fine, you can see the text, okay, you can get some main ideas and so on, but are you thoroughly comprehending what the author there is trying to say? What is the inference that you could derive from that reading material? So you really devote yourself to daily readings, and my suggestion is to read the news articles, because those are the reading passage where the reading passages come from. So for example, I would like to read the Guardian International News. I'd like to read the BBC, the CNN, not so much with the CNN, maybe at the level of New York Times. What else? The Economist. But the problem with those other news agencies is that they have a paywall. So if you can afford and you would like to have continuous, flow of information with that high level of English, go ahead. Please do subscribe to them. Maybe try for at least 1 to 3 months. You never know. And then it's really up to you if you want to continue your subscription or not. But what I know with Guardian International is that as of now, they're still they're still for free, so they're just asking for some donations. It's really up to you if you want to donate, okay? And really, every day you try to read. But my suggestion though is that do it strategically. What I mean is that identify what those IELTS common topics are. So you can actually Google it. There are some websites that post the common IELTS topics, such as the arts, business, economics, healthcare, and so on. So once you already have that list of topics, try to search for news articles related to those topics, and then as you read, try to understand. Okay, understand what it means. If you don't know that word, look it up in the dictionary, and then more importantly, try to understand how it is used. Okay, so that's really the practice of doing active reading, because you have to have two styles of reading skills building. First one is that you're focused here on understanding the content and really comprehending it at a deeper level. So if that is your study mode at that moment, okay, do not rush yourself. Okay, at the same time, when you talk about skimming and scanning, you're not after the thorough understanding of the material, but rather you're doing speed reading, where when you say skim, it's speed reading the entire paragraph and getting the main idea, and when you say scanning, it's looking specifically for some keywords like dates, numbers, names. So your focus here is getting just the main idea and some the general theme of the article, but you're reading under time pressure. So don't mix the two first. Okay, you build it strategically. Like for example, on Monday MWF, all right, you focus more on comprehensive reading or active reading, and then for Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, you focus on speed reading. And then hopefully, when you have decided to really spend some time doing some reading practice tests, you try to combine the two. Okay, because of course there are some specific strategies for that, so that's where the classes are for. Okay, but for now, no, just to give you an idea, do not wait for the review classes to start reading as early as now. Even if you haven't booked for the exam, even if you haven't searched for any review center, please develop that daily reading, because there's no shortcut to it. Usually for people who find the reading test easy, if you ask them their background, they're wide readers. Okay, so that's really my appeal. Alright. So what else?
Reading, then speaking.
Get to talk about speaking, here's what I need you guys to do, okay? Number one, I'm not so sure with other cultures, but this is what I would like to appeal again to the Filipino people. There's really something with our culture, especially for those who are Visayan speakers like me, you know, like us. We have this mentality that we tend to become grammar Nazi on our own. Okay, now to the point that you know these guys, when you go abroad, they don't even care if you have perfect grammar as long as they understand you. But whenever we try, you know, even to attempt in speaking English, we are so conscious, self-conscious in our grammar. So that's really like a wrong start. Okay, what we need to do is to, number one, just really erase that cultural mindset. This is just by observation. Okay, sometimes we think that if someone speaks English, that person is like smarter. Okay, when you talk about language skill, it's a skill. It's not an IQ test. All right. I mean, I don't speak Japanese, so does that mean that I'm stupid? No. It just so happened that I can't have that. I don't have that skill. So it's the same thing with English. We have to erase that cultural mindset that we're not good enough or we're not smart enough. That's why we don't speak English. It's a skill. So it's a learning by doing process. So number one, you have to really correct your thinking, okay? And hopefully, if you really take that into consideration, really be serious about it, then that's the time you focus on practicing and polishing. Because what happens if you don't erase that cultural mindset? You will keep on being self-conscious, you're easily intimidated, and so on. So you have less time now to really practice and, you know, correcting your or polishing your speaking skill, okay? And then what if, like, okay, you're more realistic now, I want to improve on it. So the second step is to think in English, because most of us as non-native speakers, we tend to translate in our head. Okay, for example, I am a Visayan speaker. That's my first language. English is just my borrowed language. Okay, and let's say in Visayan we say uhaw ko. Uhaw ko actually means I'm thirsty. So most of us, we think first in Visaya and then we try to process it in our head and then we say it in English. I'm thirsty. Okay, so what happens is that there's a lag, and that's not the way to practice speaking. So you have to, you know, start thinking in English. Okay, you don't anymore allow yourself to think in your first language and then try to translate it in your head, because this is to avoid some gaps or some dead air. Okay, and then it's not natural for a person, you know, to, for example, like we're talking and then I keep on like focusing on what words to say next. That's not natural. Okay, if you really study the rubrics or the criteria for the speaking test, the description there is that you sound more like a native speaker. So your goal there is to sound like them. Okay, you speak more naturally, not in a memorized manner, not in a mechanical manner. Okay, so that's the second step. Again, correct the cultural mindset. Second is the thinking in English, and then the third, number one, you try to talk about things that you know first. Okay, don't try to practice on topics that you're not familiar with. Okay, that's why the speaking test is designed like this. You have parts 1, 2, and 3. Part 1, that's a warm-up round. Okay. Okay, so I don't know if you can remember it, but in the first part of the IELTS test, it's about personal questions. So they're going to ask you about your name, your occupation.
The basic questions.
Yes, of course. Yes, your hobbies and so on. So because they understand that we are actually fluent in what we know, and at the same time, it helps us to loosen up our nerves. Okay. And then in the second part, that's where they're going to give you a cue card, all right, the task card, and then you're asked to prepare for what you're going to say in 1 minute, and then after 1 minute, you'll have to deliver it in 2 full minutes. So again, the kind of questions in part 2 is still something relatable, like let's just say, what is your favorite restaurant? Tell us about your favorite restaurant, and so on. So it's really something that is quite familiar with you. The challenge though is in part 3. Part 3 is what we call like they're asking you abstract questions if you happen to be well read, you know. In the previous section, we talked about reading daily. So see, when you read daily, it also improves your writing and speaking actually, because it gives you ideas already. And when you understand thoroughly a topic, you can explain it in a much clearer way. So it actually helps you in your part 3. So again, in terms of your part 3, do daily reading or listen to interviews, especially news interviews, because they're using academic English and then they're also tackling academic topics. I don't want you to keep on listening to entertainment interviews such as, I'm sorry, but it's MTV and so on, because of course they're kind of English. It's not the kind of English that we are going to use for our IELTS, okay? Alright, and then what else? So I think I covered the parts 1, 2, 3, and the steps again would be first to correct the cultural mindset, and then second would be to think in English, third would be to start talking about something that you're familiar with, and then you continue researching and so on before you practice part 3. Alright, so those are the 4 major steps. And again, don't wait for the review, start as early as now.
Hi! So let's talk about
what?
writing
In IELTS?
IELTS.
Sure. Usually for those who are applying as a professional, or they have decided to study in tertiary education, higher education in New Zealand, they require IELTS academic. Okay, most of the time it just ranges from 6.5 to 7. And then for those who are applying for a low-skilled jobs, let's say I think butchers, what else? Welders, okay? Yeah. They don't need academic IELTS, they need the general training IELTS. Okay, why did I mention that? Because in the writing test, okay, they actually differ. So in your writing test, it has 2 parts. We call it writing task 1, and then another one would be writing task 2. So in writing task 1, for the general training, they are asked to write a letter. So they're given a scenario, and then it's up to the candidate on how he would like to create that letter based on the task given to them. Let's say, for example, in that task, they are asked to write a letter to their friend asking for help because they have decided to move into their city, and he's looking for help when it comes to looking for accommodation and some temporary jobs. So that's a possibility, okay? So the letter could be personal, it could also be semi-personal or semi-formal, and it could also be a formal letter. So it really depends on the task. So the job of the candidate is to identify what is the tone of the letter, what the tone of the letter is, rather, and also learn what's the basic layout of the letter. Now, most of the time, the task in the GT letter writing is that they are providing you with some clues. It's bulleted actually, so you make sure that you are able to expound on them. So usually what I share to my GD students is that try to imagine that in your introduction you have your purpose of writing the letter, and then for every bullet point you allot 1 paragraph for that. Okay, so that's already like 4 paragraphs, and then you conclude it with let's say a thank you note. Okay, that's just a matter of courtesy, and then of course yours signature. Actually, signature is not needed, but maybe it's a closing. How should I say it? Like, you remember, like, you have to write sincerely or yours faithfully. Usually, though, if you don't know the person that you're writing to at a personal level, you could end it with yours faithfully and then your name. All right. But if you know the person, you could also say yours sincerely. But they're not really that strict. I think yours sincerely is actually the safest choice. Okay, so that's how it looks like. That's for the GT letter writing. And then their task 2 is also essay writing. It's just that the task in writing task 2 is again more of a general English topic. Let's say, where do you prefer to live? Or where is it better to live, in a house or in a flat? Okay, So that's the sample question of a GT essay writing for task 2. Now, on the other hand, for academic writing, okay, their task 1 is more challenging because you have to summarize a graph. Okay, so your graph could be of the 8 possible graphs. So the 2 major categories would be the statistics and also the pictographs. So the first category under statistics would be line graph, bar chart, table, line graph. Okay, so there are 4 types of graphs.
Statistics.
And then for the pictographs, you can have cycle, flowchart, maps, and illustration of how something works. Other books would call it diagrams. Okay, so my best advice there would be to try to practice all of those 8 graphs so that you wouldn't have this sense of anxiety of the unknown when you take the test. At least that you have tried any possible graph that could come out on your test day. Because sadly, some of the candidates would only focus on the statistics because yes, it's true that it's more common than the pictographs, but what if on the test date it's a map and you didn't practice for it? Come on. Okay, so it's not
Way to cover
wise.
everything.
Exactly. Okay, if you